Welcome, everyone. I'm very glad to have the honor to introduce the second guest of our lecture series, Post-Soviet Identities, 30 Years After 1989, Professor Eliot Borenstein. Eliot Borenstein is Professor of Russian and Slavic Studies, a collegiate professor and senior academic convener for the Global Network at New York University. He's the author of Plots Against Russia, Conspiracy and Fantasy Under Socialism, published by Cornell University Press this year, and an early version of which was released in the form of blog installments between 2015 and 2017, of Overkill, Sex, Violence, and Russian Popular Culture After 1991, also published by Cornell University Press in 2008, and of Men Without Women, Masculinity and Revolution in Russian Fiction, 1917 to 1929, published by Duke University Press in 2000, as well as of numerous articles on contemporary Russian culture, literature, and media. He's also the editor of All the Russia's blog at the Jordan Center for the Advanced Studies of Russia at NYU, and the editor and co-translator of Russian Postmodernism, Dialogue with Chaos by Mark Lipavietsky. Professor Borenstein's ongoing projects include the blog Russia's Alien Nation, The Secret Identities of Post-Socialism, also conceived as the first draft of his next scholarly monograph, and The Watchmen Watch, an online project dedicated to the graphic novel Watchmen and to the book's prequel and sequel comics, its film adaptations, and the most recent television remix produced by HBO in 2019. In today's talk, entitled The Talking Dead, Articulating the Zombified Subject Under Putin, Prof. Borenstein will discuss the use of the idea of brainwashing in Russian public culture and media today all along the political spectrum. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Borenstein at Brown.
Thank you, Fabrizio, for that introduction and for inviting me. Can you all hear me all right? Okay, great. I can't actually convey how happy I am to be here. When I was 17, I applied to Brown and got waitlisted, and they said they'd get back to me, and they never did. So I'm finally here, and I think I've been very patient all of these years to finally have made it to Brown. So it's quite, my 17-year-old self would be either very amused or really annoyed, but we haven't been in touch, so I'm not really sure. Anyway, so let me just get started. So I've come to tell you something that you already probably know, but perhaps not in the way that you think you know. Our world has been overrun by zombies. I speak, of course, of our mass culture, but the border between our mass culture and our world is a sketchy one. And the blurriness of this boundary immediately points to one of the main purposes to which zombies have been used in American culture, though not, as we shall see, in Russia. After all, one of the logical reactions to the breakdown of civilization prompted by a zombie uprising would be hoarding, the frantic accumulation of consumer goods. But zombie critique reminds us that this is what we already do with our lives. George W. Bush told a traumatized America after 9/11 that it should go shopping. Slow-moving zombies simply make us pick up the pace of our own consumption as we try desperately to avoid being consumed. The American zombie is, of course, a Haitian import that has been transformed almost beyond recognition. Like most products of black culture in America, it has been whitewashed, only this time to an extreme deathly pallor. The zombie of voodoo is, we should recall, an individual. It took George Romero and his disciples to make us see the zombies in the plural. Thus, zombies have become America's go-to metaphor for the problem of mass culture. We may lament the lack of a face-to-face world, but we don't want to replace it with a face-eat-face world. Zombies are pure bodies. Small wonder, then, that in many versions they crave brains. Yet zombies are also very much about knowledge and subjectivity, brains again, even if they function so effectively as a symbol of a total lack of selfhood. As a shorthand, we can understand the zombie and the ghost as polar opposites. The ghost is the self without a body, and the zombie is the body without the self. The philosopher David Chalmers has quite productively addressed the philosophical zombie as a way to think about the possibility of living without consciousness. Rarely do we ask ourselves what mindless zombies are thinking about, with Hugh Howey's novel I, Zombie a very disturbing exception. It turns out zombies in his novel they have minds that are completely aware of what they're doing, but they can't control their bodies, and they're horrified to find themselves eating people. Yet the figure of the zombie demands that we reconsider questions of knowledge and selfhood. Indeed, the prevalence of zombies as a media phenomenon turns them into bodies of knowledge, figuratively for those watching, and literally for those who used to watch, but now find themselves in their own terrible zombie stories. Zombies are the nothing we know everything about. Mira Grant's Newsflesh series about bloggers after a zombie uprising, and it has an inordinate number of characters that are named George or Georgia out of gratitude to George Romero for inadvertently training the population through films that now look like zombie preparation public service announcements. By contrast, the television version of The Walking Dead, unlike the comic, is set in a world that has never had zombie movies, depriving the show of the multiple levels of self-consciousness available to other zombie entertainments. The zombies both embody the danger of the mass media and the need to pay attention to the mass media. The life saved by a zombie film could be your own. Moreover, the fight against zombies is often not just existential as a matter of survival, but ontological. In a world where basic survival is the sole preoccupation, I am the subject of the sentence, "Fight zombies." In the television version of The Walking Dead, when Michonne is left to wander a desolate landscape in the company of a zombie herd, she is in danger of mentally becoming a zombie herself. Rick famously says in both the show and the comic, "We are the Walking Dead." But the fight against mindlessness can also reawaken a sense of self. This is one of the themes of the novel, not the movie, World War Z. An oral history of the zombie war, it cannot work without the almost palpable subjectivity of its subjects, many of whom lived unsatisfying, automatic lives before the disaster strikes. The rising of the zombies prompts a similar coming to consciousness of those who fight them. A rising tide of zombies lifts all biped boats, it would seem. If zombies are such a powerful locus of anxiety, for anxieties about subjectivity and selfhood in the mass culture, consumer-fixated landscape of postmodern late capitalism, itself an apocalyptic term if I ever heard one, what do we make of the post-socialist zombie? The zombie metaphor is alive and shambling in Russia as well, though one could argue that it comes to the former Soviet Union second or third hand. Third hand, in that it comes from American movies, which themselves are a transformation of the voodoo zombie. Second hand, in that the myth is somewhat more directly refreshed with references to Haitian practices, as in Victor Pelevin's essay, Zombification. The post-socialist zombie is harder to pin down with our assorted discursive pitchforks because the post-socialist zombie does not exist. Obviously, the zombies of contemporary Western entertainment are not real either, but they are fully imagined and imaginable. In the Russian Federation, only recently do we see an increasing number of zombie stories that are not simply a translation or adaptation. My particular favorite example is an anthology entitled A Zombie Здесь Тихие, an allusion to the popular war film The Dawns Here Are Quiet, The Zombies Here Are Quiet. Also the title of a much maligned web series produced by regional Russian television, which you can watch on YouTube, but I don't particularly recommend it. In 2016, Sergei Lukyanenko, best known for his hit Night Watch series of novels and films, tried his hand at the zombie genre with his novel called Quasi, a twist on the buddy cop trope pairing up a human police officer with a sentient zombie colleague. The following year, the Latvian-based Russian news outlet Meduza featured the work of Max Diktaryov, who had spent more than 3 years illustrating possible uses of the Moscow subway as a refuge during a zombie attack. The most sustained attempt at imagining the post-social zombie in Russia today might best be understood as pre-communist and pre-apocalyptic. The philosopher Oksana Timofeyeva's publications, lectures, and performances about zombies and revolution. Timofeyeva's approach is outlined in her 2015 English-language Manifesto for Zombie Communism, as well as a 2017 Russian-language lecture posted to the Vimeo channel of Что делать, a leftist intellectual and artistic collective that has been active since 2003. In commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the October Revolution, Что делать produced a short film narrated by and starring Timofeyeva, 4 seasons of a zombie set in St. Petersburg's Palace Square. In all of these works, Timofeyeva explores the revolutionary potential of the zombie. While admitting the standard conception of the modern zombie as the embodiment of capitalist consumption, she finds several Marxist contexts for understanding The Walking Dead. noting that Marx, without using the word zombie, which he could not have known, at times describes the proletariat in terms of an unconscious body living on the border of life and death, she goes several steps further. In the film, she describes a dream in which she is a zombie with 2 arms but no legs, while her comrade has 2 legs but no arms. To save each other, they share limbs, suggesting the maximum solidarity afforded by an infinitely decomposing, divisible body. She then explains in both the film and her manifesto the power inherent in the zombie's impersonal hopelessness. Zombie, she quotes a quote here, "Zombie is the one who is dead, who therefore does not have any hope, but still has a desire and consciousness or bodily feeling, or even a kind of instinct or inertia related to the fact that an extreme injustice of his situation cannot be tolerated. This is ultimate despair. As already dead, he just cannot live, and that's what paradoxically makes him an undead or a living dead. His decomposing body is not individual anymore. It does not belong to any person. A zombie does not have individual life, nothing to take care about, and yet he has not agreed to rest. He still desires, and his impersonal body acts. When we think about zombie apocalypse, we tend to identify ourselves with those who survive, forgetting, for example, that in capitalism, one survives at the expense of the other. Isn't this, in fact, already unbearable? But what if we are not among those happy survivors? What if we are already on the other side? Forget the hope. Revolution starts in hell. Timofeyeva's zombie is a feat of politically engaged intellectual imagination. It is also a utopian interpretation of total apocalypse that resonates with the Marxist notion that communism will likely be preceded by productive catastrophe. But like Timofeyeva's politics, her zombie is something of a niche phenomenon, deliberately diverging from the Russian mainstream. By and large, the post-socialist zombie is less an imaginary creature than it is a state of mind. This, too, would sound paradoxical, particularly given our earlier distinction between the ghost as self without a body and the zombie as the body without a self. As it turns out, the zombie metaphor is deployed quite differently in contemporary Russian discourse. As in the West, zombies are the product of contagion, but along a completely different disease vector. Russian discourse is less concerned with the zombie as thing than it is with zombie as process. Not zombies, but zombification. Western zombies are the threat of the other, even if one might see oneself reflected in the other's empty eye sockets. These zombies will destroy you. In Russia, the anxiety is different. The zombie will become you. Russian zombification is not about the perils of commodity capitalism, even after commodity capitalism becomes imaginable as part of Russia's everyday experience. Rather, Russian zombification is primarily about the relationship between mass media and audience. Zombification occurs when the viewer's or consumer's consciousness becomes colonized or hijacked thanks to media input. Zombification, in Russian zambirovanie, is almost always a metaphor when deployed in contemporary Russian cultural and political debates, but it is a metaphor that reveals a great deal about the crisis of selfhood in the post-Soviet space. We might call it the undeath of the subject. To invoke zombification is to posit a particular anthropology, based on largely unspoken but also widely shared conceptions of the boundaries of selfhood and the power of media and propaganda. Zombification only makes sense, even as a shorthand, if one is willing to believe in the overwhelming power of media input and the helpless passivity of the media consumer. In turn, invoking zombification is inevitably a political gesture, a statement about the relationship between the governing and the governed. A reification of the Russian governmental power vertical, zombification dooms the Russian audience to an inner life impoverished by constant manipulation that brooks little resistance. And as Russian language discussions of the events in Ukraine show, the willingness to invoke zombification as an explanation is a sign that nearly all sides in Russia's political debates are speaking a common language when it comes to politics and subjectivity. No one has any faith in the population's ability to evaluate media messages. As we'll see, zombification is the culmination of years of pseudoscientific discussion of mind control and conspiratorial manipulation, whose roots go back ironically to the Cold War and to American anxieties that imported and distorted proclamations of Soviet subjectivity and reforging as a myth of mind control. This is the brainwashing debate. Russia imports the idea of brainwashing in the early 90s, initially as zambirovanie and kodirovanie coding, when activists associated with the Russian Orthodox Church appropriate the scholarship of the Western anti-cult movement in their fight against so-called totalitarian sects, that is, cults. As the culprits behind zombification proliferate and return to their association with governmental and national actors, the notion that people can be easily brainwashed ultimately renders the concept of free speech moot. Speak all you want, virtually no one is capable of listening. Why should people in Russia, or more precisely the media narrative about people in Russia, lend credence to models of mind control, and to what extent is such a belief particular to Russia? Why so much mentalizing about the mental incapacity to resist outside influence? Ironically, theories of the vulnerable mind appear accurate to the extent that they spread and are repeated. The more verbiage there is about mind control, and the more the mind control meme gets assimilated by the broader public, the more minds are actually influenced by a set of verbal inputs about mind control, which leads to a somewhat paradoxical formulation. One does not have to believe in brainwashing to believe that people are being brainwashed into believing in brainwashing, zombified into believers in zombification. The brainwashing zombification narrative works because it posits the vulnerability of others while reinforcing a sense of one's own self as strong and inviolate. I am not zombified because I can see how zombification has worked on others. The reader who comes to believe in zombification has undergone the sort of conversion experience demanded by tendentious fictions, particularly by utopias. They believe themselves to have forsaken the darkness of Plato's cave for the light of truth. But as the idea of zombification becomes normalized, and therefore an almost universally available weapon in everyone's rhetorical arsenal, the resulting allegory of the cave begins to resemble Escher's famous drawing of hands drawing themselves. In this instance, no one can agree as to which side is the cave and which side is the light. So allow me to present an admittedly schematic overview of the development of the brainwashing zombification paradigm and its relationship to Russia, starting with Marxist-Leninist thought and ending with Putinist absence of thought. First, Marxism shares a belief in the malleability of human nature in general, and the individual human subject in particular, with the broader utopian tradition. The new world must be inhabited by new people who will be formed by the social processes of developing socialism. Moreover, Marx famously transforms the idea of coming to consciousness into something on the order of a law of history. Changing the world starts with changing people's minds. This is a proposition that Bolshevism would reverse. First, socialist conditions must be established by a vanguard party on behalf of the people, and then the people will, by living in these conditions and being brought to class consciousness, turn their own minds into the proper subjects of a new socialist order. The Marxist subject is not a closed-off integral self, nor the Leninist and Stalinist selves, despite their roots in Marxist heresies. Thus, we see the emphasis on education, re-education, reforging, and education through labor that starts in the 1920s and takes on its most famous form in the works of the educational theorist, the scholar Makarenko. The post-Soviet scholarship on Soviet subjectivity, while overturning so many key elements of Cold War historiography, only reinforces the sense of a malleable subject, albeit a subject who might actively choose to appropriate the dominant discourses in order to build a better self. By the time the term brainwashing comes into currency in the West, in the aftermath of the Korean War, it is not only a response to Chinese thought reform and the experience of prisoners in communist Asia, it is an idea that appropriates the Marxist malleable self for decidedly un-Marxist purposes. What if the communists really can change people's minds? What if they are trying to change our minds right now? If the Soviet leadership views artistic production as a way of creating better citizens of communism, here we recall Stalin's famous description of writers as engineers of human souls, then perhaps our own cultural productions have been co-opted by propaganda meant to subvert and to transform us. The brainwashing narrative is the demonic inversion of Marxism's optimistic take on human malleability. This essential ingredient of utopian thought becomes the foundation of dystopian nightmare. In the West, anxieties over brainwashing express themselves directly in The Manchurian Candidate in 1962 and obliquely in Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956. Even Czesław Miłosz, the Polish Nobel laureate, gets into the act in his 1953 book, The Captive Mind, which was hugely influential on Western Cold War thought and borrows from Ignacy Wickiewicz's dystopian novel Insatiability in using mind control as one of its basic metaphors. By the time George Romero unearthed the zombie legend in Night of the Living Dead in 1968, brainwashing had become a familiar trope of thrillers and horror, with no need for undead corpses to supply it with metaphorical power. Brainwashing was a nightmare of communist indoctrination, not, like zombies, an allegory of the perils of capitalist consumption. The actual mechanics of brainwashing were unimportant and varied from narrative to narrative, much like the mechanics of time travel in the sort of low-rent science fiction that would eventually inform the brainwashing narrative. Throw in the numerous exposés of top-secret Soviet parapsychological research, nearly always about some form of mind control, and the Soviet Union becomes ground zero for a wide variety of mind control fears in the West. But the brainwashing meme would follow a familiar epidemiological pattern, making a critical species jump in the 1970s. The menace would no longer be communism, foreign or domestic, but the new religious movements, NRMs, that sprang up so frequently in the wake of 60s counterculture. Castigated as cults by the detractors, these movements, like the Hare Krishnas and the Moonies and so on and so forth, had leaders or founders who were ascribed quasi-mystical, pseudoscientific powers. Innocent victims allegedly found themselves brainwashed, with their only hope of their rescue in the hands of a new profession, the deprogrammers. The result is a controversy that continues to generate a great deal of literature, scholarly and otherwise. On one side is the anti-cult movement, whose faith in brainwashing is used to dismiss the faith of new religious converts, and on the other, the NRM scholarly community, whose approach to this object of study is more ethnographic and anthropological, and who have developed an alternative set of paradigms for explaining new religious movements' appeal. When brainwashing finds its way into Russian discourse of zombification after 1991, it is defined largely by this cult context. Its roots in Cold War anti-communism all but ignored, the discourse of zombification is one of many cases in which what is essentially an ongoing debate in the West is imported as one-sided received wisdom in the Russian Federation. Political correctness being another even more important example, where there's a debate in the West and there's one interpretation that's imported into Russia. Thanks to the tireless work of anti-cult scholar Alexander Dworkin, new religious movements are routinely termed totalitarian sects and treated as zombification factories. In an ironic and indirect fashion, Russian anxieties about cult zombification look to the same culprit as did Cold Warriors in their warnings about brainwashing, the KGB. When the first major cult panic hit the former USSR in 1992-1993, it centered around a movement called the Great White Brotherhood of Maria Devi Christos. This is her. Maria Devi and her husband, Yuri Krivanogov, were routinely accused of manipulating their impressionable followers. But it was Krivanogov who became the main object of suspicion. His prior work in a KGB post office box, that is a secret research facility whose name is always hidden and just identified by its post office box number, his prior work is assumed to have provided him with state-of-the-art mind control techniques. Even worse, he appears to have worked in artificial intelligence, leading one commentator to speculate that his actual project had been, quote, the transformation of natural human intelligence into artificial intelligence, which clearly shows that this guy has no idea what artificial intelligence is. But it doesn't matter because it sounds really scary when you put it this way. Maria Devi Christos brought zombification to the mainstream. First, because her followers hijacked long-standing means of spreading information in urban centers, plastering her image all over subway cars and trams. That is at a time when Western-style advertising was both particularly novel and particularly annoying. Television news announcers would inform viewers that there would be ads from, say, 1740 to 1743, so, run over to your TV so you can watch the commercials. When such advertising had already taken over the very same public, physical, and virtual spaces previously reserved for overt propaganda, signs, billboards, airtime, Maria Devi's ubiquity highlighted the very idea of message as contagion. In addition, the bizarre garb and behavior of her followers, their willingness to leave their homes and their families, became legible only within the context of zombification. The portrayal of occultists as zombies was one of the few points of commonality with Western capitalist zombie tropes, since the Brotherhood was terrifying precisely because they were alleged to be so numerous. The media took at face value their claims to 144,000 followers, a figure whose biblical provenance should have led to skepticism about its accuracy as census data. By 1993, when the movement was disbanded and its leaders arrested, the population had, for all intents and purposes, survived the post-socialist zombie uprising. And like all survivors, they were wary of repeat attacks. Zombification in Russia is also an idea based on an outdated understanding of the media. When cultural and media elites express anxiety over the presumably pernicious effects of a given media phenomenon, they rely on an implicit anthropology of the people on whom the media acts. In the early days of both media panics and media studies in the West, this imagined viewer, reader, or listener was likely assumed to be an impressionable and unsophisticated, entirely passive vessel for the media's message. Thus, the media effects school, whose ideas are so closely associated with moral panics about the dangers of comic books in the 1950s, assumes the helplessness of media victims. To borrow from a metaphor from popular biology, a given media risk group, usually children or teens, lacks the immune system necessary to fight off an invasive media attack. Among scholars, the media effects school is now largely dismissed, though it survives on daytime talk shows and the local nightly news and the works of the critic Peter Pomerantsev. Instead, critics now focus on ways in which audiences rest and create possibly unintended meanings from the media they consume. Zombification in Russia combines a belief in sinister manipulation with a naivete of the media effects school to create a passive, vulnerable subject that is always ready to be duped. The 1990s, by spreading the zombification meme far and wide, effectively domesticated the post-Soviet metaphorical zombie. The media disseminated a wide variety of messages, as one would expect from any developed media culture. But one of the main meta-messages was about the porousness and vulnerability of the self to external messages. We see this meta-message in the rise of imported advice and lifestyle tracks. Indeed, in this context, Dale Carnegie's seminal How to Win Friends and Influence People, a post-perestroika runaway bestseller, takes on a slightly sinister ring. Mind control, often KGB-derived, was a recurring trope across the spectrum of crime and adventure novels, from action novels involving zombifying cults, this is Mad Dog Woman, brainwashed robots of death, this is Mad Dog, and even multiple manifestations of mad science in the works of the decade's most popular crime novelist, Alexander Marinina, who presents a behavior-modifying electromagnetic waves in her Death for Death's Sake and Infinity of Evil. The red-brown conspiratorial novel, whose roots go back to both the Brezhnev-era crackpot theory of the American Dulles plan to corrupt Soviet minds and morals, as well as to the remarkably innovative paranoid rantings of Grigory Klimov, who identified a Jewish homosexual cabal behind a Harvard project that was working to destroy Russia by introducing genetic sources of evil into the country's gene pool. All of this took zombification as an article of faith. Sergei Norka's Inquisitor trilogy and in a more complicated fashion, Alexander Prakhanov's Mr. Hexagon also did this. Sergei Karamurza would produce two humongous tracts about the role of manipulation of consciousness in post-socialist Russia. But the bard of zombification was one of Russia's most popular writers, Viktor Pelevin. Pelevin introduces the topic in a 1994 essay entitled Zombification, Zombifikatsiya, a term that would quickly be supplanted by zombirovanie. After a rather lengthy overview of Budo tradition, Pelevin makes the rather easy argument that everyday life in the Soviet Union was in itself an ongoing zombification project. Pelevin, however, would quickly adapt zombification to post-Soviet reality, or at least to what passes as reality in Pelevin's deliberately elusive fiction. Mind control through media manipulation is a recurring motif in Pelevin's novels, achieving its ideal form in his 1999 novel Generation P, Homo Sapiens. Pelevin's hero discovers that the post-Soviet mass media are part of a political and mystical conspiracy to rule and dupe the country's population. Even Yeltsin turns out to be nothing more than a hologram. Tellingly, the hero's journey to consciousness, which is sort of, if you imagine the allegory of the cave plus Photoshop and holograms, starts with Dale Carnegie, moves to the basics of Western advertising, and culminates in his understanding of the deceptive unreality of the mediated world that he himself helped maintain. Though Generation P shares many tropes with other post-Soviet conspiratorial novels, it differs radically in tone. Nork and Prakhanov are sounding the alarm, while Pelevin is registering a mixture of admiration, amusement, and disdain. Indeed, Pelevin is taking part in the corrosive cynicism of the post-Soviet era, tacitly encouraging his readers to assume all speech, particularly political speech, is suspect precisely because it is trying to be persuasive. The rhetoric of mind control is a powerful persuasive weapon that devalues the persuasive political speech and ideals of one's opponents, consigning all those who believe what they are told, by people who one abhors, to the realm of the zombified. Accusations of zombification are a useful tactic in the general undermining of all political discourse, in that they serve as a substitute for actual evaluation. The very question of free speech is thus rendered moot. Rather than evaluating speech according to its worth, its sincerity, and its efforts, speech can be entirely dismissed. Speech becomes excess, either as the flood of verbiage that zombifies its audience, or the meaningless sounds uttered by the zombified subject. The zombie who repeats what he or she has been told is something of a hybrid, a kind of zombie parrot. The classic zombie does not speak at all. The dismissal of so much speak as nonsense is a powerful idea. It suggests that perhaps the discourse would be more productive if more people would choose to be silent. The political advantage that such silence might hold for powerful elites is clear, but it also parallels an aesthetic judgment that partakes of a different kind of elitism. Recall Anna Akhmatova's lament that through her example, she encouraged women poets to speak, and now she only wishes that they would learn to shut up. Decades later, Milan Kundera mounts a sustained critique of a vapidly confessional culture in the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, populating his novel with graphomaniacs who labor under the illusion that their inner lives are worth expressing. Kundera captures this idea in one of the novel's most powerful images, that of 6 apparently anxious ostriches on display in a zoo. The ostriches were like messengers who had learned an important message by heart, but whose vocal cords had been cut by the enemy on the way, so that when they reached their destination, they could do no more than move their voiceless mouths. Written in 1979, the Book of Laughter and Forgetting targets a capitalist commercial culture that is still largely analog, and that still finds its abject other in the world of developed socialism. Yet in the decades that see both the digital revolution and the collapse of communism, Kundera's skepticism about the proliferation of words seems prescient. The intelligentsia's hand-wringing about the market's vulgarization of culture would quickly be superseded by the occasionally disturbing democratization of discourse online, something I think we should be familiar with in our own experience here. And this is where the regime and the opposition come together. The regime apparently assumes that people are idiots, easily duped by what they see on television, but their message is coded in populist invocations of the common people's values. The opposition finds itself falling into the trap of agreement with the regime's attitude towards the population. Hence the repeated disdainful use of the word bydla to describe them. An obsolete word for cattle, bydla as a collective noun describes stupid lumpen masses separated from the zombified only by their species. Critics of the media scene in Russia today, where the state's grip on the largest media outlets has grown stronger and more obvious in the past 2 years, posit an imaginary Russian media consumer, a post-Soviet couch potato whose gullibility helps the regime ruin the country. Hence the frequent accusation that so-called patriots and the 84 or 87% of the population that allegedly supports Putin are victims of zombification, an accusation that Putinists in turn hurl at the supporters of Ukrainian independence, essentially conflating crowds at a street protest with the proverbial zombie hordes. In both cases, the primary tool for zombification is said to be the television, the zombie box, zomboyeshik, the equivalence of the boob tube in English. Which is seen to be the source of all the problems. The critique of the zombified television audience is a revolution that will, in fact, be televised. In 2015, science fiction writer Yuri Khor exploited the zombie box metaphor with a twist in his novella Zombified, Zombie TVN. The novella's capsule description puts it more clearly than the actual novella. Quote, "The ancient magic of necromancy has been forgotten, but modern technology is our daily reality, a reality filled with the so-called information field created by the various broadcasting media, from newspaper to radio, from television to the internet. The latest innovation in broadcast formatting has led to an unexpected effect, creating actual zombies." When television journalists use the new TVN format, when they use that format and point their cameras at a dead body, that body rises up and becomes a zombie. In Khor's story, zombification is not what the television does to the viewer, but rather what the television does to the viewed. Zombie TVN, perhaps inadvertently, highlights the multi-directional nature of accusations of zombification. It is not simply that the viewer is being zombified by television, but that television is offering its viewers images of others who are framed as zombified. Any consideration of the current zombification paradigm must take into account the manner in which people on the screen can be used to support the notion that people are being zombified by the screen. The material produced on state television, whether in Russia or Ukraine, is not the sole justification of the zombification paradigm. It is the videos that viewers themselves make for YouTube and upload them that is used as evidence of the zombie box's power. Not long before Putin began his third term, the zombified viewer took on a special face, the video blogger turned cult figure who referred to himself as Astachov Sergei. This is Astachov Sergei. Astachov Sergei, he always refers to himself last name first, was a Muscovite in his early 30s who started posting videos to his YouTube channel in July 2010. He died in early 2017. Though his video archive is an object lesson in the perils of bad metadata, 6 videos in a row bear the title My New Russian Orthodox Video. By 2013, he was accumulating viewers through both YouTube and VKontakte, becoming one of the Russian internet's most famous freaks. That same year, Anatoly Ulyanov related a 20-minute documentary compiled from Astakhov's clips under the inevitable name My New Russian Orthodox Video. Whatever else one might think of Ulyanov's work, this distillation of more than 200 videos is something of a service to viewers in that it functions as a greatest hits reel. Astakhov describes himself as, quote, an invalid, referring casually to his, quote, many physical and psychiatric diagnoses, most of which remain unnamed. Kinder viewers have speculated that he might be schizophrenic or that he falls somewhere on the autism spectrum. Less charitable commentators choose from a variety of insulting epithets. Ulyanov's video, along with another documentary called Durakam Здесь не место, No Country for Fools, by Oleg Mavrodi, are careful to show some of Astakhov's more amusing and idiosyncratic behaviors, like dancing nearly naked, talking about his favorite foods ad nauseum. Many of these behaviors would be familiar or at least legible to people who have watched some of the many autobiographical videos of neurodiversity that YouTube facilitates. Both Ulyanov, and I feel uncomfortable showing, I could have shown you videos, but he put these images up for himself, he put himself on display, but I feel that when he is put on display by others, there's a kind of exploitation that can be going on. On the other hand, I also feel like you kind of have to see this to get a sense of what it is. So you can go online and watch the videos if you want. Both Ulyanov and Mavromati are particularly taken by Astakhov's discussion of religion, politics, patriotism, and sexuality, which vary from the oddly profound to a confusing word salad in the course of under a minute. In one breath, Astakhov will refer to himself as a Russian Orthodox patriot who demands the elimination of sodomy and gays from his motherland, and also refers to his own sexuality, explaining that he understands men because, quote, he herself is a man, потому что я сама мужчина. As a documentary subject, Astakhov appeals to both his directors as an embodiment of everything that is wrong with the Russian media in general and the Russian media consumers in particular. In his description of his film on YouTube, Ulyanov writes, just a second. Sergei Astakhov is contemporary Russia gripped by patriotism and Russian orthodoxy. Here, against the backdrop of endless Olivier salads while watching television, the very biggest shopping centers are being built and laws against homosexual propaganda are being passed. Living on the outskirts of Moscow in a labyrinth of faceless gray high-rises, Astakhov absorbs this caricatured Russian world and expresses it in his very sincere YouTube videos. Neither director is at all interested in considering the ethical dimensions of using Astakhov as a subject, since Astakhov himself made these videos public. Nor do they seem particularly concerned with the ramifications of their work for the disability community, though Ulyanov is quick to point out that new media has given shut-ins an unprecedented opportunity for public self-expression. Yet Astakhov's apparent disability, whether defined neurologically or psychiatrically, is part of their overall point. His cognitive deficits are what allow the directors to critique the current Russian media political environment. For each of them, Astakhov is something of a limit case that clarifies the condition of a notional average Russian media consumer. One of the first things Astakhov says in Ulyanov's film is, "I like to watch Channel 1." His blind faith in Russian state television and his ability to hold multiple, seemingly irreconcilable beliefs at once are set up for the viewer as the proverbial mirror of satire. Viewers are meant to recognize themselves, or more likely the neighbors they disdain, in Astakhov's image. Mavromati is usually less explicit on the matter than Ulyanov, but the fact that Mavromati's film debuted in a festival entitled Signals Everyday Propaganda speaks volumes. These films attempt to expose the weakness and gullibility of the Russian viewing subject by suggesting that said subject is by definition an idiot. Ulyanov and Mavromati assaulted the imagined Russian viewer through identification with a person who no one presumably would want to be. Ulyanov calls Astakhov defenseless in the face of the media onslaught to which he willingly exposes himself every day, thereby offering him up as in support of the most simplistic model of propaganda. In one interview, Olga Rybukhina asked Mavromati point blank, "So you're equating Astakhov and the new Russia that is being born right before our eyes?" It should come as no surprise that Mavromati answers in the affirmative. Ulyanov Ulyanov and Mavromaty juxtapose Astachov with the imagined television viewer in a manner that insults them both. Astachov, in that every simile and metaphor used here completely deprives him of agency, when even Ulyanov had also recognized the power of YouTube precisely for self-expression, and the Russian patriotic viewer, who in addition to his presumed passivity, is also implicit in being called an idiot. By depriving viewers of agency, Ulyanov and Mavromaty fall into the very trap that they imagine awaits the Russian media consumer. If there are messages in the media, their content is irrelevant and unworthy of evaluation. Instead, we pay attention only to the manner of presentation. It is the metadata rather than the medium that are the message. The use of Astachov as symbol for the Putinist audience results in a particularly damning view of the population. Framed as mentally defective, Astachov is essentially always already zombified. He's also the ideal model for the outdated media effects model, and an ironic inversion of Steve Kotkin's notion of speaking Bolshevik, in that as he tries to speak Putinist, he is dealing with a language that he has not mastered. Whether or not he's on the autism spectrum, he does belong on a spectrum with fellow viral video star Sveta from Ivanova, the naive, cow-eyed young woman whose tongue-tied attempts to explain her support for Putin's united Russia made her an internet sensation. Her signature phrase is that under Putin, things have gotten more better, более лучше, which is ungrammatical in every language. In Sveta's case, her video fame also led to a career in reality TV, a career that could not have been successful if her fan base were limited only to those who appreciated her as kitsch or camp. Sveta and Astachov indirectly point to one of the political inadequacies of the zombification model. Both speech and the reception of speech are assessed entirely according to the standards of rational intellectual discourse. When individual subjects, or worse, large segments of the population, produce speech that is logically and ideologically incoherent, it is easy to dismiss the speakers for the presumably faulty standards of judgment. Both Astachov and Sveta remind us of the extent to which political beliefs and their expressions are not the product of an idealized Cartesian subjectivity. More often than not, such pronouncements are the product of emotional rather than intellectual reasoning. Do you have a reflexive sympathy for the underdog or for the oppressed? Do you find group solidarity of paramount importance? Zombification is not based on false psychological and informational premises. It is based on the belief that politics are the product of rational thought and that intolerable political beliefs are founded in faulty rationality. Zombification looks plausible in a conflict between competing affects, devaluating not only the content of the speech, but the feelings that supply the content. A world in which one's ideological opponents are a priori zombified, or in the American case, duped by fake news, in a world in which words are no longer trusted. More specifically, words are taken to be purely performative. Their constitutive value, assessed according to truth or falsehood, becomes less a matter of cognition than of affect and allegiance. Engaging with the demonized discourse, whether zombification, propaganda, or fake news, starts to look suspiciously like engaging in it. That is the logic, or perhaps anti-logic, that animated the protest movement of 2012, when Russians in the capitals took to streets in response to rigged elections, another phrase that now carries more venom than it does meaning. Protesters carried signs with playful slogans that resembled clever status updates on Facebook taken to the streets. The protest combined two important features: the sheer fact of bodies on the streets and an absurdist refusal to engage with official rhetoric on its own terms. The protests and the actionist art that grew out of them refused to fall into the trap of the articulate. This is the essence of Pussy Riot's punk prayer, the scandalous guerrilla anti-Putinist performance in Moscow's Church of Christ the Savior that led to the arrest of 3 of the participants. Pussy Riot set aside all notions of reasoned argument in order to make a set of emotional, deliberately shocking performative statements. Pussy Riot did not argue the regime, at least not before the trial, at which point they pulled off a stunning code switch and assumed the roles of articulate intellectual dissonance. They did not argue with the regime, they yelled at it. The denial of discourse is an even more prominent feature in the work of Pyotr Pawlenski, who first came to fame for literally sewing his lips together in response to the persecution of Pussy Riot, a stance that might have availed him better than his verbal statements in response to the more recent rape accusations against him. His subsequent abuse of his own body, nailing his scrotum to Red Square, cutting off part of his ear on the roof of the Serbsky Psychiatric Institute, appropriates, as Anastasia Kayato so deftly argues, the nonverbal language of defiance practiced by Gulag inmates in Soviet times. The rhetoric of zombification, like the zombie plagues of film and fiction, spreads inexorably through contact and engagement. The main difference is that the heroes of zombie tales know that they can't stop zombies through argument, nor do they think their opponents are dupes of Machiavellian power. The response to zombies and zombification cannot depend on words. It is not that words fail us, but that words have already failed us before we even begin to fight. Thank you. Anyone has any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
So first of all, thank you for your great lecture, which refers to the first part of the lecture. I had a problem somehow to relate your account of discourse related to zombification, your account of the 50s and 60s, and how is it related to the discourse in contemporary Russia? You mentioned The Captive Mind by Miłosz, and like as in a sense, the book which is concerned about this another question. But for me, the Captive Mind by Miłosz is about something else, because this is precisely about ineffectiveness of the ideology. It is more about the strategies the poets and intellectual took, rather cynical and related to purely physical and economical survival. So this is about the strategy they employed to survive in the very particular moment of history, because it does not even refer to the 60s, 70s in Eastern Europe, but to 50s. So as I say, so somehow I don't see this book in the context of your lecture. And the same it refers to Witkac's novel Insatiability, but this is a different story.
Right. So no, I agree with you to the extent that, in a sense, what you're talking about is the book. And what I'm talking about is how the book was probably misread in the West.
I don't know, he did the title because he wanted to sell it. So why not to? I mean, so yes, the title is the phenomenon, and it's worth to reflect upon. But the content was about something completely different, I guess.
Oh yeah, I would not argue that. I'm not talking about Miłosz's intent in this book at all. I'm talking about how part of it ended up playing into this emergent discourse about brainwashing, about communist brainwashing. That is, I would agree that in emphasizing this, I'm giving a kind of misreading of Miłosz, but I don't think I'm the first person to give them misreading of Miłosz. What I'm saying is that this book comes out at a time when people are already concerned that communists are brainwashing people, and so therefore this part of it ends up feeding into the idea that communists brainwash people. I mean, we have to be careful. The book is much better than that, and much more complicated than that, I think. But the rhetoric of anti-communism in the West was so schematic and so primitive that I don't see evidence of it having much room for nuance. And Miłosz's book has nuance, but the discourse in which ended up inadvertently participating had very little nuance. So that's what I would say about that.
I have a totally naive question.
Sure.
First of all, thank you for the fascinating talk, because I really enjoyed the discussion of these differences with which I'm very much intrigued, the difference between zombification and zombies, and how you present it as really different in Russia, in the West. And I just wonder if zombification, just the whole notion of zombification, as opposed to simply threat of zombies, implies that Russia is more vulnerable to this than the West. Because if this is only the matter of things, or zombies and the others, then it's kind of easy to create some kind of defense mechanism, be it Cold War, Star Wars, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But if it's a process, as you're describing in Russia, then essentially, people become defenseless.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think they're posited to be defenseless everywhere. But what's happened is that there's strands coming together in Russia that don't come together in an English-speaking country by the simple fact that our metaphor is brainwashing and our metaphor isn't zombification, right? So that the metaphors end up influencing, I think, how one conceives of the process, right? So that when we talk about brainwashing, an entire population can be brainwashed, a single person can be brainwashed, but brainwashing does not then give you the image of what the brainwashed end up looking like as a group or anything like that. Zombification does the same work as brainwashing, right? It is transforming your subjectivity into something that is not what it is really supposed to be. But then it also results in it converges together with the image of the zombies that we have from mass culture, thanks to George Romero and later, so that zombification is a process that brainwashes and then leads you with this hordes of the zombified. So that metaphor, I think, thanks to, even though the zombie starts as an individual idea with in Haiti, thanks to how the idea of the zombie plays out in Western popular culture, using zombification as the metaphor for what we call brainwashing, then does end up giving us a sense of the result, the brainwashed masses. But I think everybody is posited as being vulnerable. The difference is that the zombification meme or metaphor, however you want to put it, becomes big in the 90s at a moment when everybody is concerned that Russia is vulnerable on so many different levels, right? There's so many multiple metaphors of Russia's weakness, Russia's weak borders, Russia's natural treasures, Russia's women, however you want to put it, being ravished by the West. And also Russia losing its identity because of Western influence coming in, so that this is a moment, in a sense, it might not be a moment when Russians are actually more vulnerable to zombification, if you think zombification is something, but it is a moment when the Russian media is more receptive to the idea that Russians are vulnerable to zombification, because it's such a fraught moment when the entire country's sense of self seems to be at stake. The culture is changing around them so fast. When I try to explain to my students what it meant, what it might have felt like in the late Soviet years and early post-Soviet years to watch Western mass culture infiltrate. See, the words are all very hostile and military. Infiltrate your own native culture. I would explain that, for if you're born in America, you're of a certain generation, you're so used to the idea that the American superculture dominates everything that we don't necessarily have that experience. The one experience I could come up with for people of my generation would be the sudden influx of Japanese culture or Japanese mass culture. All of a sudden, manga and anime are everywhere, and you have all of these columns in the media, and basically people. Older Gen X people and younger baby boomers talking, my kids are watching this crap, I can't make any heads or tails of it. It's not like the stuff we had when I was a kid, the Saturday morning cartoons about Scooby-Doo and stuff. That was classic great art. They're watching Pokemon. What the hell is Pokemon? What's happening to our country when everything is Pokemon? And so there was a moment, and there's also a moment when America was very concerned about Japan, a moment when you could have a sense in America of what it felt like to have this kind of cultural invasion. But for the most part, we tend to export. But for Russia, where there had been the Soviet Union with a strong desire for so much Western cultural production and so little of it coming in, that its arrival was something of a wish fulfillment. But then it turns out, like so many wish fulfillment stories, including The Monkey's Paw, the great zombie story, what you get turns out to be much different from what you thought you actually wanted. This is. All of this, I think, comes together to the sense of this kind of basic ontological threat, this threat to the self. Any zombie fans?
It's interesting, you brought this picture of zombies, this ticket, which is kind of like, seems to be just an amazing translation of Russian perpetual anxiety crisis to a Russian zombie crisis, identity crisis.
Yeah, and
It's a Russian zombie, right?
right, and so clever and so catchy, and as so often the case, that it brings you back to World War II somehow, because everything somehow goes back to war. Yeah. There is the web series, really, really terrible, and ends quite predictably with the Cranberries singing "Zombie," which is one of the big cliches of any kind of zombie story.
So are zombies like Trinitarians pretty much united? Are united, or they're all distinct in different countries?
Well, the funny thing, I mean, from what I can tell, the representation of zombies post George Romero tends to fall into pretty familiar types. So there's the sort of classic shambling zombie. Then there's the sort of fast rage zombie from 28 Days Later. There was a wonderful thing on the internet in the like 2004, 2005, which was a parody of reality show competitions. It was called America's Next Top Zombie, and it had representatives of each zombie type, right? So there's the rage virus zombie, the shambling zombie, all these different zombies trying to compete to see who would be America's next top zombie. And of course that's just American, but really the zombie types tend to the actual portrayal of the zombies just tend to all be rooted in a few sets of famous films coming out of America and the UK, and then just get kind of copied. And the original Haitian zombie type is more or less gone from people's popular understanding of the zombie. You can never. It used to be it was always one zombie. Now zombies are like potato chips. You can never have just one. You have to have lots of them.
Well, all right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.